And let's create some sparks. Turn this off. In fact, I can use this blast node as a source for the sparks. So what I want to do, I want to add a pop network. Connect this. Gonna be my pop sparks. Go down here and select as points for the bus. And I don't know, like 150, I don't want to have like 5,000, and play with the life expectancy like 2 by 2. So now we just create some particles around, and they took a velocity from our original particles, from our guide's particles here. But what I want to add here is the pop advect by volumes node. And now here I want to set the path to actually even not here. I need to go up to my tornado fire. And then did have null objects, I guess. And yeah, I can set the fire out. Fire out. Leave Pyre solver enabled to render. And now let's set fire out. I take a velocity from there, and I want to update this velocity with the velocity blend is 1. And now those particles should move with those velocities. Some of those still here because they created in a position where there's no velocities, so they just stay at the same position. Maybe I'll use a trace method. Okay, and I just remove those particles which doesn't move. So the attribute wrangle, and let's say that if you had no speed, so again the length of velocities should be maybe not equal to 0. Maybe I'll remove even particles which are moving very slow, so less than I don't know, 0.4 maybe. Then remove 0.0 pt_num. So now all those particles which doesn't have a movement, they will be removed. Okay, let me just set the flat shaded, hide other objects for better updating. And now let's maybe add a color for them. Can add a constant color, can work with some ramp colors, and basically we can stay at this stage. Sparks, because if we have a velocities, and we have velocities, go summon frame 48 or 50 to have those particles. Take some time, but not too much, I guess. I hope. So there is a few options. The first option is we can render those particles as a particles. Basically, if you go to, let's set render for those. Let me just wait till this particle updates. Okay. Now let's go here and create a geometry. Guess my volume light, I don't want to visualize it. And I definitely don't need to use this for a moment. Or I can visualize it, but disabling the viewport. No, doesn't work, right? Like here now. Just want to hide this thing here, so we can disable this and just, you know, add those lights for rendering. So let's create a sparks. Let's make them the same color. So with the object merge, I will get my particles from our bottom from sparks. That's my sparks. And now I have a velocities, have many different, so let me just remove some attributes, delete all attributes except of the velocity. Velocity I will keep. So position, velocity, and yeah, I remember color. And let's, I don't know, I'm gonna sparks out. We can set the render flag for this. Just make sure that it will render out. So flag our render. So now if you go out, go to our render mention nodes. I will add a new mention because we render out just the volumes. Now I will work with geometries. Set as sparks, cam1, and within objects, I need to add sparks. With the candidate light, I guess with the fourth light, I will use all those 3 lights. For the particles, it doesn't make too many sense, but let's just remove this for a moment. So we go to render view, and I choose my cam1. I choose my sparks here, and press render. It doesn't take too many time because we have just 242 megabytes loaded here, and we have some sparks. So let's back my lights here, all those 3 guys. Now we're gonna have our file lamp does not exist. I guess that because you want to find the object which doesn't the file vertex. Interesting. It should be there. Okay. Sometimes this can be. We have an error. Anyway, we have the particles. So if we turn on motion blur, we can stop this, and then turn on the motion blur. We can physically base rendering. Now we don't have this. I guess we won't have this error because sometimes when we apply our volume light and we not reset our render, it can cause some errors. All what you need is just stop rendering, just render again, and error disappears. Oh, I forget to set the velocities for my particles, so velocity blur here. Now we have a blur, and what we can do here is you can see that this blur is not a big. Okay, so what we can do at this moment is, well, the first thing, go to out and increase the sampling rate because it's pretty low for such a small particles. So let's see and add just a standard base render, not the preview. And what I want to do here, I want to change my particles velocity. So basically what I can do, I can set that oops, sorry, what I'm typing, attribute wrangle, and say that I want to take my velocities and I will multiply them by, let's say, 3. So now you can see we have a bigger velocity blur. But what is bad in this case, that this blur is very, very linear. So when we multiply the velocities, it doesn't create nice curves. It doesn't create, you know, when you look on on sparks, it's not a lines. It has some curly, different, like small lines with some noise on that. So definitely need to add something different, but not looking like just a small lines rising up. They should have like a lens and some noise. Okay, so maybe it's more looking like a geometry, not just a particle flying, because those sparks has a strange trajectory. They doesn't move very linear like we have here. Our velocity is very smooth for our particles. So we definitely can add some noise to these velocities, try to, you know, reposition each particle in each frame randomly, but I guess it won't work. Another thing we can play with is our p-scale. So we can say that our scale is, I don't know, like 0.025. So it should be much smaller. But in this case, I want to make a little bit different thing. So I want to create a line between two particles, between particle at this position in this frame and particle in a position with the same particles, with the same particle, but in a position which this particle had in a previous frame. So when I add a time shift and say that I want to change my frame like +1 or -1, and then it should be calculated. And then I want to merge from frame 49. Then I want to merge those particles using the merge node. So I connect the old particles and the same particle positions just in another frame. So now we had the same particles. Okay, so this particle and this should be the same, but this particle in the next frame and this particle in this frame. So for this thing, I should leave my IDs to define where those particles have an ID. So if you look here for our IDs, you can see that all particles, well, not all, this particle is not, mainly most particles have the same IDs by 2. So 2 particles with ID 5, 2 particles with ID 8, and etc, etc. The ID in except of the point number is unique. So if we remove some particle from the point cloud or the particle cloud, the point number deleted particle will be set to another particle. So if we have 1,000 particles and we remove 500, so those IDs we removed, so not IDs, point numbers we removed, will be applied to particles which will leave. But if we delete particle, let's say with ID 305, and create a new particle, it will have any ID but not 305, because this ID was removed. So now we have the unique IDs, and if we have 2 IDs, this means that we have the same particles. So we combine the same particles twice. Okay, it's like time travel. But what we can do with this, if we add the add node, we can create a polygon between the particles which has the same IDs. So if we use the all points, it's try to create just, you know, lines around all particles. But if I choose by attribute and set my ID, it will mean that we create a polygon between particles with the same IDs. So now we create something like a sparks, so it's create a nice line. But again, this line is straight. It doesn't have any noise, so we can add this noise. To do this, we can go and add the for each primitive, because now we have a primitives based on our particles. Let's select single pass, and where you are. So no, single pass, any. Yeah, here you go. So now we have just one line, and this line containing from 2 points. I definitely need to add a resample to add a little bit more points. And I want to do the same trick as we did with the curve in a very fast lesson. I create the controlled amount of points, so I can create exactly like an 8 points and say, okay, now I want to create a group based on those particles, okay, from 1 to 7, right? So now I select all my middle points here. And then I can add the attribute warp for getting the noise for those particles. So I select this group 1, and add noise. We can recall this group. It's going to be mid particles, and select mid particles. Okay, and set a very simple thing. We add the turbulent noise for those particles. Position, add turbulent noise. So it should be a 3D noise, and let's send all my settings to this here, to the setting of my attribute warp. So let's set a sparse convolution noise, and it doesn't apply. I don't know why, but if we choose my mid particles, let me just, oh, primitive, sorry, points, sure. This noise is very, very big. So let's say it like 0.3 or 0.4. The frequency, I guess, too big. Something like here. And now if we use a single path, let's play with this. Yeah, maybe here. Yeah, that could be fine. And add a polywire to create a geometry, because we can render out particles, but if you want to render geometry, we can't render a line by default. So with a wire radius, we can set very low radius like 0.01, and with a bigger amount of divisions, we can create a better line. Okay. Now it's looking pretty good. Let's connect my sparks out here. And now we can apply even some texture here. So before we go into the group, we can apply UV texture node to get the texture coordinates for my spline. Let's set it to uniform spline maybe. Or let's set the rows and columns. Oops. And to the point, and then go to attribute warp, and let's add the color ramp down inside. Now I want to apply a simple color ramp to my UVs. If you go to geometry spreadsheet, we have a UV coordinates, and I want to select my second. I give 5 or the first one. Let me just go for each. And UV, yeah, the first one, so the X. So I want to take my vector to float node, take my UVs, and grab the first one float number to add a ramp. I'm going to use the color ramp and apply this to the color of each of those points. And it will transfer this color to the primitives. So let's set this almost the same color like we had in our fire, just to make later a ramp, like a transition between those, maybe more to yellowish, something like here. It's looking good. Now let's save it and let's try to render this again. And I make a render. Again, we have those lines because they look like particles because of the lighting. But now this is our lines. You can see it's changing direction. Maybe a little bit more of noise, a little bit more noise. So let's render this and change the noise amount like to 0.3. You can see a bigger noise here.